The hollow signal. The storm rolled in just after midnight, a snarling beast of wind and rain that clawed at the windows of the old cabin. I'd rented the place for a week, a cheap getaway in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in the dense pine forests of northern Maine. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just me, a stack of books, and a rusty radio I'd found on the kitchen counter. The isolation was the point. After months of city noise and a job that chewed me up, I needed silence. But that night, the silence broke. It started with the radio. I hadn't touched it since I arrived, didn't even know if it worked. But as the storm howled, a low hum sputtered from its speakers. I figured the wind had jostled some loose wire inside. I stumbled out of bed, barefoot on the cold wood floor, and flicked the power switch off. The hum stopped. Good. I turned back to bed, lightning flashing through the curtains, when it started again, louder. A crackling, wet sound, like someone gargling static. I yanked the plug from the wall. The cord dangled limply in my hand, but the noise didn't stop. It grew. Words started to form, faint at first, then clearer, cutting through the storm like a knife. You're not alone. You're not alone. You're not alone. The voice was deep, guttural, layered with echoes that made my skin crawl. I dropped the cord and backed away, staring at the radio as its dials spun on their own, the needle jerking across the frequency band. I told myself it was a prank, a signal bleed from some distant station caught in the storm. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and checked the cabin. Every corner, every closet. Nothing. Just me and the wind and that damn radio, still chanting its refrain even unplugged. I smashed it with a hammer from the toolbox under the sink. Plastic cracked, wire spilled out, and the voice finally died. Silence returned, heavy and thick. I laughed, shaky, convincing myself I'd overreacted. Then the lights went out. The cabin plunged into blackness, the storm's roar filling the void. My flashlight beam trembled as I swept it across the room. The windows rattled harder, like something was testing them. I locked the door, checked the windows, everything secure. But the air felt wrong. Heavy, like it was pressing down on me, watching me. I sat on the couch, flashlight clutched tight, waiting for dawn. That's when I heard the footsteps. They came from upstairs. Slow, deliberate thuds on the floorboards above my head. The cabin was single-story. There was no upstairs. I froze, breath shallow, listening as the steps paced back and forth, dragging something heavy behind them. A scraping sound, metal on wood. My mind raced. Animals, a tree branch hitting the roof. But the rhythm was too human, too purposeful. The flashlight flickered. I smacked it against my palm, and when the beam steadied, I saw it. A shadow on the wall. Not mine. It stretched across the room, tall and thin, with limbs bent at wrong angles. I spun around, aiming the light everywhere. Nothing. Just the empty cabin. But the shadow stayed, moving when I didn't, sliding closer along the wall. The footsteps stopped. Silence again, but worse this time. My ears rang with it. Then a whisper, not from the radio, not from anywhere I could pinpoint. It was inside my head, soft and slick. Look behind you. I didn't want to. Every muscle screamed not to. But I did. The room was empty. Relief hit me, then vanished. The flashlight caught something on the floor, a wet trail, glistening like oil, leading from where I'd been standing to the front door. The door I'd locked. It was wide open now, swinging in the wind, rain pooling on the threshold. Beyond it, the forest loomed, black and endless. I slammed the door shut, bolted it, and wedged a chair under the knob. My hands shook as I grabbed my car keys from the counter. I wasn't staying. Storm or not, I'd drive until I hit civilization. I turned to grab my bag and froze. The shadow was back, standing in the corner, no longer on the wall but in the room. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was solid, towering, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, arms dangling too long, fingers brushing the floor. Its face, if you could call it that, was a smear of darkness, like a hole punched through reality. I bolted for the door, ripping the chair away, fumbling with the bolt. The shadow didn't move, but I felt it watching, its presence thickening the air. I threw the door open and ran into the storm, rain stinging my face, mud sucking at my boots. The car was 50 yards away, parked under a sagging pine. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The keys slipped in my wet hands as I reached the driver's side. I jammed them into the lock, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life. Headlights cut through the rain, and I floored it, tires spinning before catching traction. The cabin shrank in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the dark. I drove for an hour, maybe more, the storm chasing me down winding roads. My pulse didn't slow until I saw the faint glow of a gas station ahead. I pulled in, panting, and stumbled into the fluorescent-lit store. The clerk, an old man with a bored expression, barely looked up from his magazine. "You okay, son?" he asked, eyeing my soaked clothes. I nodded, barely coherent, and asked how far the cabin was from there. He frowned, setting the magazine down. "Cabin? Ain't no cabins out that way. Just forest. Been empty for years after the mill shut down." I stared at him. I was just there. Rented it online. Old place, 1 story, radio inside. His face tightened. "You said radio." He leaned forward, voice low. "Folks round here talk about a signal. Old broadcast tower got struck by lightning decades back. Burned down, but people still hear things out there. Voices. Say it's the dead, trapped in the wires." I didn't sleep that night. I drove straight home, 300 miles without stopping, the storm fading behind me. When I got back to my apartment, I checked the rental site. The listing was gone. My payment history showed nothing, like it never existed. But it wasn't over. Last night, I heard it again, the hum. Faint, buried under the city noise. I don't own a radio anymore. I threw out everything that could make a sound. Still, it's there in the walls, in my head. You're not alone. And this morning, I found a wet trail on my floor, leading to the window. It was open. I live on the 10th floor. The skin beneath. The apartment was a steel, 3rd floor. Rent so low it felt like a typo. The building was ancient, a crumbling brick relic on the edge of town, but I didn't care. I'd been sleeping in my car for weeks after the breakup, and anything with a roof sounded like heaven. The landlord, a wiry guy named Carl with yellowed teeth, handed me the keys and muttered something about keeping the noise down. I figured he meant parties. I was wrong. The first night, I noticed the smell. Faint, sour, like spoiled milk mixed with damp earth. It lingered in the corners, strongest near the bedroom closet. I chalked it up to old pipes or a dead rat in the walls. Nothing a candle and some bleach couldn't fix. I unpacked my duffel bag, set up a folding chair as furniture, and crashed on a mattress I dragged up the stairs. The place was bare, but it was mine. Sleep didn't come easy. The walls creaked like they were breathing, and every so often, a low thump echoed from somewhere below. Probably the furnace, I told myself. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a different sound, scratching. Sharp, erratic, like nails raking wood. It was coming from the closet. I grabbed my phone, using its light to scan the room. The closet door was cracked open, though I'd sworn I'd shut it. The scratching stopped as I approached, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against my ears. I yanked the door wide. Empty. Just peeling paint and a single wire hanger swaying slightly, as if something had brushed it. I slammed it shut, heart thudding, and wedged my chair under the knob. Imagination, I decided. Stress. The next night, it wasn't just scratching. It was a voice. I'd fallen asleep with the window open, a cool breeze cutting through the stuffy air. The sound woke me, a wet, rasping whisper, so close I felt breath on my neck. "Peel it back." I jolted upright, flailing, expecting someone beside me. Nothing. The room was empty, the window still open, curtains fluttering, but the mattress was damp where my head had been, streaked with something dark and slick. I wiped it on my hand, thick coppery. Blood. I tore the place apart that night, flashlight in one hand, kitchen knife in the other. No blood anywhere else, no signs of a break-in. The closet door was still jammed shut with the chair. I called Carl at dawn, voice shaking, demanding answers. He laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "Old buildings creak. You're fine. Don't call me about ghosts." He hung up. Day 3. I found the mark. I'd been scrubbing the mattress, trying to erase the stain, when I noticed it on the wall behind the bed, a faint outline, like a child's drawing of a person. It hadn't been there before. I touched it, and the plaster felt soft, almost spongy. I pressed harder, and my fingers sank in, up to the knuckle. The wall pulsed, warm and wet, like I'd stabbed something alive. I yanked my hand back, gagging as a trickle of black liquid oozed from the hole, pooling on the floor. That's when the whispering started again, louder, from everywhere, ceiling, floor, walls. Peel it back. Peel it back. I ran to the door, but the knob wouldn't turn. The lock was jammed. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the apartment into a dim gray haze. The air thickened, heavy with that sour earth stench, and the walls began to move. Not collapse, move. Rippling, like skin stretched over muscle. I grabbed the knife and stabbed at the wall, desperate to break through, to escape. The blade sank in easily, too easily, and a scream, not mine, erupted from the cut. Blood sprayed, hot and sticky, coating my arms. The walls shuddered, splitting open, revealing not brick or insulation but flesh, raw, glistening, veined with pulsing arteries. Faces pressed against it from the inside, mouths gaping, eyes bulging, clawing to get out. I stumbled back, slipping in the blood, as the floor softened beneath me. It wasn't wood anymore, it was alive, sucking at my feet like a hungry mouth. The whispers turned to shrieks, deafening, a chorus of agony and rage. I swung the knife wildly, slashing at the walls, the floor, anything to stop it. Each cut birthed more, hands bursting through, skeletal and clawing, skin peeling back to reveal more skin, endless layers of writhing, screaming meat. I don't know how I got out. 1 minute I was drowning in it, blood, flesh, voices. The next I was on the street, soaked red, knife still in my hand. The building loomed behind me, silent, windows dark like closed eyes. A cop found me an hour later, babbling about walls that bled. They searched the apartment, found nothing. Clean walls, dry floors, no bodies. Just my stuff untouched. They let me go, called it a breakdown. I haven't gone back. I crash with a friend now, but it's not over. Last night, I woke to that smell again, sour, damp, alive. There's a mark on his wall, faint, shaped like a person. I hear it sometimes when the house is quiet. Peel it back. And this morning, my fingers were wet. I hadn't cut myself. The well watcher. The house sat at the edge of a dying town, a sagging 2-story relic swallowed by weeds and neglect. I'd inherited it from my uncle, a man I barely knew who'd lived alone since the 80s. His will said he'd left me something special, along with a faded photo of the place, a crooked porch, cracked windows, and a stone well out back half hidden by brambles. I didn't want it, but I needed the cash, so I drove out to sell it. That was my first mistake. The air stank of rot when I arrived, a humid August evening with cicadas screaming in the trees. The front door creaked open without a key, like it had been waiting. Inside was a museum of dust, warped furniture, yellowed newspapers, a rotary phone with a severed cord. A note sat on the kitchen table, scrawled in my uncle's shaky hand. "Don't look in the well." No explanation, just that. I crumpled it and tossed it aside. Superstitious old man, I figured. Probably lost his mind out here. Night fell fast, the kind of dark that eats light. I explored with a flashlight, cataloging what I could salvage. The upstairs was worse. Moldy wallpaper peeling like skin, a mattress stained black, a mirror in the hall so warped my reflection looked like it was screaming. I avoided that room after one glance. Downstairs, I found a trapdoor under a rug in the living room, padlocked shut. I left it alone. Selling the place didn't require a full excavation. Sleep was impossible. The house groaned constantly, with settling or something heavier shifting in the walls. Around midnight, I heard it, a faint splash, like a stone dropping into water. It came from outside. I stepped onto the porch, flashlight cutting through the gloom, and traced the sound to the well. The brambles around it were thicker than in the photo, thorns snagging my jeans as I pushed through. The stone rim was slick with moss, the hole pitch black, swallowing the beam. Another splash echoed up, louder, deliberate. I called out, half joking, "Who's down there?" Silence answered. Then a laugh, low, wet, bubbling up like it was underwater. I backed away, heart pounding, and locked myself inside. The note flashed in my mind. I told myself it was an animal, a frog maybe, splashing in some shallow puddle at the bottom. But the laugh stuck with me, replaying in my head as I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. Morning brought no relief. The sky was gray, oppressive, and the well drew me back. I couldn't leave it alone. I needed to know. I grabbed a rope from the shed, tied it to a tree, and lowered myself over the edge. The air inside was cold, damp, reeking of stagnant water and something sharper, like rusted iron. My flashlight caught the walls, stone carved with jagged lines, symbols I didn't recognize, spiraling down. 20 feet in, my feet hit water. It was freezing, waist-deep and thick, like wading through oil. The bottom was uneven, littered with shapes I couldn't make out. I swept the light around and froze. I stared back. Dozens of them, pale and unblinking, floating just beneath the surface. Not fish, not animals, human eyes, severed, drifting in the murk. I gagged, splashing backward, and something brushed my leg, soft, cold, deliberate. The rope jerked, pulling taut, then snapped. I fell, plunging under, the water flooding my mouth with a taste like blood and decay. I clawed my way up, gasping, and saw it. A figure at the edge of the beam, hunched, too tall, its head cocked sideways. Its skin was gray, glistening, stretched tight over bones that didn't fit right. It didn't move, just watched, its mouth a lipless slit leaking that same wet laugh. I screamed, thrashing for the wall, fingers scraping the stone. The symbols pulsed, glowing faintly red, and the water churned. Hands grabbed me, dozens, invisible under the surface, yanking at my ankles, my arms, my throat. I kicked free, adrenaline burning, and hauled myself up, clawing at the carvings like ladder rungs. The thing didn't follow, but its laugh did, rising with me as I climbed. I made it out, collapsing in the dirt, soaked and shaking. The well was silent again, but the house wasn't. The windows rattled. The door slammed open and shut, over and over. I ran to my car, engine roaring as I peeled out. I didn't stop until I hit the highway, an hour away. The rearview mirror empty, but my skin crawling like I was still being watched. I sold the place sight unseen, dirt cheap, through a lawyer. Told him to burn it down for all I cared. He didn't ask questions. I thought that was the end, until last week. I woke to a splash in my apartment bathroom. The sink was dry, the tub empty, but the mirror was fogged up, a single word scratched into the steam. Look. Last night, I heard the laugh again, faint, bubbling up from the drain. I haven't slept since. The water in my glass tastes wrong now, sharp metallic. And this morning, I found an eye staring up from it.